Okay, I'm going to make a start. Okay, welcome everyone to this newly launched concept. This is Coffee with Cornwall Science Community. So it's a little coffee break snippet of science for you. Just to do a little bit of housekeeping, we've got our December newsletter just around the corner of being released, so keep your eyes out for that. Also, just make sure you keep your eyes on all of the social media platforms where we'll be talking about our up and coming talks. I think, David, actually, you have an announcement for our latest booking.
Yeah, so in December for our normal evening cafe slice again on the 16th of December, we've got Dr. Chris Smart from the University of Exeter who'll be talking about a really cool citizen science project in archaeology with a talk on archaeological mapping from airborne LiDAR. So that will be on the 16th of December. I will also share the link to the mailing list in the chat, just in case not everyone signed up, so you can definitely keep in touch with the newsletter and other events once I find the link.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Okay, so on to today. So this morning, we're lucky enough to have Tristan Holmes speaking to us. So Tristan is a really good mate of mine. Me and him, we both studied applied ecology together at Cornwall College, Newquay, and discovered a way to put the world to right together, or try to do that. So Tristan,
we hope.
We hope so. So Tristan today is a manager of agroecological urban microfarming. So he currently runs a community garden project with Newquay Town Council, and also helps to manage urban green space around the town more generally. He's also a great chap and a very keen researcher, but I'm not going to introduce him any further. I'll let him do that himself. So Tristan, over to you.
Hi everyone. I'm just going to start to share the screen. Hopefully that all goes to plan and open up a PowerPoint presentation. Can everyone see that okay? Can you see that okay, Connor?
Yep, that's all good at the moment. We're just waiting on the slideshow. Yeah, there we go. That's popped up. Brilliant.
Okay, everyone. My name's Tristan Holmes. I'm going to present to you today basically about how we founded a small community interest company aimed at basically increasing the productivity of community green spaces, in particular for people as well as wildlife, and hopefully building a better green space is for the future. And so I'm just going to run through quickly who I am and what brought me down this route at this point in my career. And so my name's Tristan Holmes. I started my career at a very early age. I actually started volunteering at my local zoo at the age of 12, refusing to go to school and landing myself in adult education with all the bullies, just the place I didn't want to be. And by the age of 16, I had my first full-time job as a zookeeper, and I was running my own department by my early 20s. And I absolutely loved my job. I really believed in ex situ conservation and all the work we were doing. But I got to a point in my career, in my early 20s actually, where I began to wonder about my job and where it was going, and could I be more or do more in a positive way for conservation? I didn't feel like I was contributing enough. I was breeding all these rare and endangered animals, some of them critically endangered, and yet we never had the time, the staff, or the finances to do so properly. I'd end up with traffic jams of animals in lunch boxes, and the habitats around the world were disappearing as fast as these animals were breeding. And I come to the conclusion that, maybe this wasn't going to go anywhere. Could I contribute in any other way? So I took the opportunity to leave the zoological industry, and I broke away at the point I needed an emergency cornea transplant. So it was a perfect time to go back to school and train how to be an ecologist. And during this time, I joined Cornwall College, Newquay, and spent lots of time in ponds and removing invasive species, so a lot of habitat restoration, lots of surveys with the Eden Project, and I actually started my project, my second year project on the abundance of bumblebee species in under different land management cutting regimes. And it was at this point I started to read words like neonicotinoid, for example, which are basically these neurotoxic chemicals that are dusted or integrated with the soil to increase agricultural output. And I saw this diagram in Nature in a study by Professor David Goulson, and it really shocked me. We're growing crops with these neurochemicals that's coated on seeds, and of this chemical, only around 6% is actually up in the bulk of the plant. The rest is down in the soil, and nobody was really researching this, and it got me really concerned. And that it's at this point that I discovered alternative agriculture, permaculture, or agroecology. But at the same time, I was working in Newquay with a local community, trying to improve green spaces. And so I became more aware that actually not only are we creating tremendous problems in agricultural environments with regard to the environment, it's also happening in our green spaces. And so going on to the next slide. While studying, I was working in close relationship with Trelogam Residents Association, and I became aware of a wealth of this environmental documents, town and country planning regulations, and also these key documents here by Cornwall Council. And I'll give you just a statement from one of them. Cornwall's Green Infrastructure Strategy states that green infrastructure is a vital component in sharing the health, wealth and identity of our communities through the demonstration of multiple benefits from investing in restoring, enhancing and integrating natural systems. And the Green Infrastructure Strategy for Cornwall is an attempt to make a positive and proactive approach to management and enhancement of Cornwall's natural assets. I became very frustrated with these documents, or not so much with the documents, but with the management style that was being applied to our urban green spaces that seemed to contradict them. But don't get me wrong, these documents are, they attempt to be a positive way forward. And one thing that's been born of these documents is the Forest for Cornwall. It's a way to plant trees and woodlands which will contribute to carbon neutrality by 2030, and we're going to cover approximately 8,000 hectares or more of canopy cover, which is about 2% of Cornwall's land area. This is a brilliant project. It's amazing. Cornwall Council should be really proud of themselves, bringing a lot of conservation organisations together to work in a positive way forward. But as far as green spaces go at the moment, and I am just talking about urban green spaces here, the existing management methods are just not compatible with any of these three documents. We have many arm's reach companies working to manage footpaths, playgrounds, scrub habitats, flower beds, grassy areas. And they're meant to be they're meant to be carried out with standards laid down in Cornwall Council's environmental service standards. And the role of Cormac is to support the enhancement of Cormac's rich and varied landscapes and enhance its wildlife, provide good quality public open spaces, a value for money sustainable places, a place to mitigate the effects of climate change, sequester carbon, wildlife corridors, and have, you know, huge benefits for the community, including increased physical, mental health and welfare. But when I walk around green spaces at the moment, it's very hard for me to keep a positive mind. I want to go to a green space and relax, and I can't help but see all the damage that we continue to do through our management. Trees are constantly ring barked, the very carbon pumps in our green spaces. We spend thousands of pounds every year on cutting grass. Here's just a few trees. I don't know if you can see that the skirt around the base of the trees, that kind of discoloration where they're constantly whiplashed by strimmers, and the roots are gouged when we run over them with mowers. And you know, it's a real shame, because the answer is quite simple, and it's not to go near them. You know, once the trees are damaged, we start to get open wounds, and just like a human wound, once it's open, it really is open. We're open to infection and disease. Our growth hormones start to kick in as a predator response, and trees then begin to grow dangerously into roads, and then we have to pay for furthermore to manage them properly. And so here's a tree here that's barely alive. This was taken last spring. It's been ring barked by the base, and basically water cannot get up into the canopy, and so if it cannot regenerate from the base, the tree basically dies, and then it gets less standard for several years. And this is one of the main drivers of how we wanted to combat what was happening in urban green spaces, and how we could potentially create areas of land that were truly sustainable, and not only sustainable but regenerative. So how can we turn empty green space with a few trees scattered around, you know, how can we improve it in a way that's good for people, good for wildlife, gives us value for money, and it's sustainable? How can we make it you know, fit in with the pollinator strategy and improve it for the community? How can we engage with nature in a space like this? It's just empty space. Children aren't allowed to play here for making too much noise, too steep to kick a ball on. Offers absolutely nothing. Gone were the days when, you know, it wasn't long ago when I was a child and these green spaces were absolutely covered in a tapestry of daisies, dandelions and trefoils. I couldn't go home at the end of the day complaining to my mum that I'd been stung by a bee running barefoot, getting a further clip on the ear because I'd gone out with my shoes on. Where have all the flowers gone? It's all the way we're managing urban green spaces. And, you know, Forest for Cornwall may well sort some of this out, but my feelings about it at the moment is that we're just plonking a few tree species into some turf and increasing the abundance of trees. I don't think we're actually tackling the problem of biodiversity and creating corridors properly between these trees. We're about to plant a huge amount and spend a huge amount of money on planting new trees whilst not addressing the management problems that are happening. Some of the trees are being selected specifically to increase pollinators, yet around these trees there's no habitat for the bees to nest. You know, surely we need, as well as flowers, plenty of urban habitats to increase pollinator abundance. Here's another one. Again, slope. It's a public open green space. It's absolutely, you know, useless for anything. You know, it's too steep to kick a ball. And again, people have lost the joy of having children laugh around them, which I think is a real shame. Another empty space. And this is my favourite one. This is known as Treloggan Children's Park or Dale Road Play Area. where you can have no ball games at all. It's just an open, muddy patch with nothing going for it. You know, and so how can we turn these spaces into something spectacular that might help mitigate a huge array of environmental and economic problems, social problems? You know, I live in a fairly poor estate. I've always lived in housing estates throughout my life. I don't think that's going to change now. I have absolutely no option to feed my children organic food without growing it myself. There is no choice anymore for organic food because we have to go to the supermarkets for empty shelves of fruit and vegetables, sitting on the shelves. All that's organic, and it's very few products that are organic, are sold at novel prices for people who can afford it. How can we give people in poorer backgrounds a choice to eat clean organic food? You know, we have food banks absolutely begging at the moment for money to provide fresh fruit and vegetables to children. And it just seems mind-boggling that we're not using space more efficiently in a way that perhaps we can relieve some of that pressure on food banks and give children the opportunity at the same time to go and select their own food, grow their own food, whilst also, you know, engaging with nature at the same time. You know, what better way to learn about nature and the environment than growing your own food with nature? Children are facing nature deficit disorder. It's actually a recognized term now. You know, how can this be? How can we get our children off their screens and back outside? You know, the space is there. The space is there to create the green space custodians of the future, but we are not using it to its full potential. And so Connor and I basically set out to see if we could incorporate an agri-ecosystem basically into urban environments that are not good for anything else basically. And so we built a relationship with a local community of Traralgon through various groups, Nuki and Bloom, and we started Traralgon Community Action Group, Habitats Group, and we started doing STEM outreach with children. The children did everything from making nest boxes to wildlife surveys, and we basically use citizen science as our tool to bring the children and get them involved and engage with nature. And by getting the children involved, we then had a hook. We had a hook for their parents and their grandparents, and they became interested, and we started to get them on board. Children then came to events where we would try and create our own ecosystems in public green spaces. And so with the groups together, Traralgon Community Action Group went in and we cleared up this community green space. We removed fly-tipped waste that had been there for years, and we restored a pond, and we got the children seed bombing and helping us make conditions more favourable for wildflowers. And this is their project now. This is what the children did with us. When we first started surveying wildlife in this area, our pond dip would find 3 species, and the children are now up to 300 and more species of both flora and fauna, and we're still counting more turning up all the time. And so Connor and I we'd heard about this piece of land becoming available under a investigation. We knew where the land was. Could we design a human-engineered ecosystem that would feed people as well as engage them with wildlife in an urban green space, make it productive and alternative management? And we knew about permaculture or agroecology, as it's known by some now, and we knew about forest gardening. A forest garden is basically an agronomic system based on trees, shrubs and perennial plants mixed together in a way that mimics the structure of a natural forest, and it's meant to be the most stable and sustainable type of ecosystem in this climate. That's by the Agroforestry Research Trust. Their terminology of what forest gardening means. And so Connor designed this piece of land to include an urban garden demonstration that would link the community's housing to the land, an edible windbreak that would be essential in protecting the land and the fruit trees from the oncoming northerly winds. Self-picked berry areas where children can get the nutrients from berries that they can't otherwise afford. There's a green and blue wildlife corridor running through the site, which connects not this site but others together, and once connected, also connects up to the national rail network. So it has potential to be a huge project. And so this is the urban garden demonstration. It's a small area connected to the main part of the land. It connects the houses and the streets to the project. People can sort of collect in this area. They can socialize, perhaps sit down. People on the way back home from the supermarkets that live in the mature residents can sit here and take a break on the way home with their bags of shoppings. And it would be a great place where we can demonstrate permaculture to the community so that they might take their ideas home so they can test it out in their own gardens. The pandemic has shown everyone that perhaps we can't be entirely reliant on supermarkets. I think it would be dangerous to do so. We need to understand how to grow our own food. This is a self-picked berry areas. Self-explanatory, and the cream of it is this polyculture orchard. You can see the blue at the top running across the trees is actually a swale which will collect water, which will run slowly through the land and water the trees and provide nutrients for the trees as it flows through the land rather than just washing straight off the top and silting up our rivers. There's an accessible footpath that runs below each swale berm where people can easily access fruit growing above them, positioned in such a way that even people with mobility aids will be able to reach and get involved with the project. And so we had this piece of land, which at the time we were calling Polwhill Community Forest Garden. And then right at the top in the right-hand corner is the Treloghan Doorstep Green with our outdoor education area. There's the stream running all the way down to the bottom left side of this picture is actually the River Gannel, and right in the middle, that yellow area is actually an 1800s orchard we found. So we have potential here to join all these little projects together and create one big green corridor. And again, once you get to the North Treloghan Doorstep Green, it then joins that national rail network. And so, it spans the length and breadth of the country. And so doing this wasn't easy. It was easy to make relationships with the community, but there was also always a triceratops in the room. Excuses not to go along with the project range from anything between it was unrealistic to you may scratch my car when you're going past, or even we were planning on adopting this land under the Squatters' Right Act. So there's always some kind of obstacle from someone getting in the way. It hasn't been an easy ride. In fact, it's taken 4 years designing and planning this project to even get on the ground. It's not easy, but if you get the opportunity to go from it, I would say be persistent and just go for it. You will feel down at times, but the positives that will come out of this project once it's completed will be overwhelming. So we won local government's trust, and we then had to enter a tender process, and we won the right to create the agroecology project. This was a really hard process for us. We actually had to be out our own business plan, which took me 9 months to write, and then I had to take it away and make amendments for another month. we actually wanted to start a charity, and we will never know why Newquay Town Council wanted us instead to create a CIC, but I think it has something to do with the fact that their policies are to show that there's competitiveness between their suppliers, and so I think that may explain why a CIC, a community interest company, was more appropriate for them than starting a trust. And so our mission was to reconnect communities with each other and the environment for sustainable food production, and we were to design this alternative, sustainable, and I've put regenerative as well, communal green space, an alternative land management. And so this is the first goings on of actually getting on the ground a few months ago. The field was actually donated by a developer. Unfortunately, either side of this project is being developed by 400 odd houses, a restaurant, and a hotel. So we're using a lot of land over the next 10 years. But the one positive thing that's come out of it is a relationship with the developer that has allowed us to gain access to land for communal use. And so in September we went in, and the land was flailed once all the birds and insects had left, just so that we had a good view of the land and we could start to implement Conor Kendry's design. And so we went in with A-frame levels. There's Conor and Terry there. Terry Nichols is one of the directors. This was basically to implement the swaling system, an urban drainage system, which would eventually flow into a pond at the bottom of the project. Again, aquatic systems are among the best systems for absorbing carbon and storing carbon, but also building biodiversity. What's life without water? So day 2 was actually incorporating these accessible pathways. This was perhaps the hardest part of the design, I think, because we had to ensure that the land was accessible for mobility aids, yet the paths also had to be permeable for water to flow through. And so we opted for this sort of grid force, I think they call it, sort of a honeycombed plastic, which we then fill with aggregates, and eventually the aggregate will grass over, but it just allows the ground to be firm enough for a wheel to pass over it. Equality is a big deal these days, and it's something that we have to make sure that we integrate with the system. It actually only took us 2 days to lay 500 meters of these pathways. It was really hard work and it was quite expensive, but once the job is done, it really is done. There's nothing more to do. It's a permanent, or eventually will be a permanent, regenerative agri-system. So you see Conor there standing on top of whale. In there is planted mimosa trees. Their role is to be a support species in this system. So they're fixing nitrogen in the soil, they're building the health of the soil food web, and ultimately these trees will be used to fertilize our heavy yielding crop species, our apples, pears, plums, everything that we want to eat. So that their function is to support the agri-system. And then the last picture on here is the swale with some water in it. So once the land reaches its water holding capacity, water flows down into that swale and it fills up where it overflows into another swale. And it just ensures that there's always water stored on site or flowing through the land rather than straight over the top to water our trees as it goes, so we don't have to spend time running around with watering cans, and eventually it becomes self-sufficient. And we hope that by doing it like this, that the water that enters the system from above actually leaves the site cleaner than when it arrived. So the edible windbreak here running down the side of the project has multiple functions. Not only does it protect our crop species from the harsh environmental conditions of the North Cornish coast, it will provide habitat for a wide range of wildlife that will then provide the ecosystem services that we need to make this project successful. You know, we need pollinators in here. We don't want to run around with our hands and dusters trying to make fruit ourselves. All the, you know, birds' nests through the summer, birds feeding their chicks with live food is going to be essential to keeping caterpillars off of our fruit. And in return, you know, these hedges will also provide them with nesting space and fruit. And, you know, that's not a bad thing. We should expect to lose some of our produce as thanks for the services these wildlife will provide us for free. Here's Connor planting some broom. We actually went for a species of broom that's quite hardy, and again, it will fill a supporting role. It's fixing nitrogen in the ground. It will have, you know, leaves at a very high nitrogen level, and again, we will use that to cut back at the end of every season to mulch around our fruit trees. The swales there, up to this point in the middle photo, is actually covered with a whole range of nitrogen fixing legumes, and also daikon radishes and comfrey. So we've selected species on there that have got very deep tap roots. They're going to enter the soil and help to break it up, but they're going to draw nutrients up from the soil depths where plants that can't otherwise access those nutrients can make good use of them. And there's just another little picture there of the project at the end, showing the pond with some water in it, just to show that it does work. And so these are the foundations of our edible ecosystem. I don't believe that it's just sustainable, it's completely regenerative. Over time, you know, initially there will have to be some work that goes into it, some quite heavy, costly work in terms of our own energy. But once it's done, it will be self-regenerative and it will be easy to maintain. Not just for decades, but for generations to come. You know, it's going to be a permanent fixture in the landscape, and we hope that it's going to feed, you know, a person for a lifetime, not just a few years. And so this is our alternative to managing some green spaces. It's obviously not. It's not an alternative for every green space. We still need recreational areas for, you know, kicking a ball around or walking the dog or whatever. But for those that are unproductive and sitting there doing nothing, us spending, you know, thousands of pounds on cutting grass every year, you know, what's the point? Let's increase the productivity of this land. Let's increase its value, and you know, let's have a more real sustainable future. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. Hopefully you've enjoyed it somewhat and haven't babbled too much. I'm not very used to this kind of thing. And just to say thank you to Cafe Scientific for having us, and from all the directors of our young community interest company. I've lifted us all there and provided my email address if there's any interest of anyone, how they might be able to get involved, and hopefully it's given some sort of inspiration on how people might be able to create their own sustainable urban green spaces for, you know, a better future for our children, if not us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tristan. That was absolutely fantastic. Apart from the very embarrassing photo of me at uni. That's not cool. Oh, no, thank you so much for that talk. There's not too many of us in the room at the moment, so I think more than happy to just open the floor to potential questions. So Tristan, if you could stop sharing the screen, just that way, then you can have a panel view and see who might be looking to ask you some questions. So
Is that stopped?
Robin, you had a question at the beginning.
Well, yes. Noting what you were saying about the way that urban wild spaces is being managed under contract with Cormac, what I was wondering was whether the contracts themselves just haven't kept pace with the increasing realisation of the damage that's being done, or whether the council has tried to update its contracts, but it's Cormac that aren't being policed and monitored and aren't actually doing what they're supposed. In other words,
Yeah,
who should we be? You know, who to
yeah,
lobby
yeah.
to at least stop the destruction, quite apart from the more creative stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, we actually had a very large meeting online with Cornwall Council, Cormac and the Forest for Cornwall some months ago about this issue. And we were actually promised that this would stop with the increase of green halos around the trees.
Mm-hmm.
So they are aware of the problem, and the arboriculturists are aware of the problem as well. But unfortunately, it has continued beyond that meeting, so it's really quite disappointing. And obviously, there's quite a lot of how should I word this?
Oh, word it undiplomatically. Go on.
People are not willing to accept that the damage that they have actually done. But also in sympathy with Cormac, I think at the moment a lot of their ground staff are under increasing pressure in terms of the time that they are given to manage our green spaces effectively. And many of them just aren't aware or don't receive the training to manage wildflower areas properly, or not to walk up to a tree with a strimmer or gouge a side of it with a mower. And so this issue continues, and I hope we can continue putting pressure on our local councillors to attempt mitigating this problem. And our way of mitigating it actually is these agri-systems, but obviously these agri-systems aren't possible in every urban green space. My hope is that we can just tackle the management issues through a higher representation within Cornwall Council and Cormac. But at the moment, I'm feeling like there's a lot of lip service and no action, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like you're being kind of diplomatically sympathetic to the problem that Cormac has of no great increase in funding and increasing expectations as to what they will do, which is fair enough.
Yeah.
But it does sound as if the council's contracts are wanting them to manage the environment more sensitively than Cormac are managing to do.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
And so what they're doing isn't compatible with those kind of their policies, their current environmental policies.
Okay. So we're quite into citizen science, and we're increasingly interested in the idea of citizen curating. But I do wonder whether there's such a thing as a citizen vigilante to actually, perhaps we should be noticing these things and telling our councillors that this is not what we want. This is not how taxpayers' money should be paid, and we'd rather have a little bit of greenery around the trees.
So I'll come in now and speak at this point about Tristan as a Newquay resident as well. When a post of Tristan Holmes comes up on Facebook and he's tagged Newquay town councillors in it and he's talking about environmental degradation, that this guy gets a response, and he does that by going to the community to voice his opinion. So Tristan, above anyone that I know, understands the way to engage local government, but also understands the way to use his rights as a member of the community. So someone to definitely learn from. We have actually also had a fantastic question from Chris. So Chris, you've asked, how is the engagement with the community developed over time? You spoke earlier on about the resistance to the project, Tristan. Has this been replaced with some more enthusiasm as the development's taken place and people have seen it?
Yeah, I think as the development is taking place, the land itself has become, there's a lot more foot traffic, people interested in what's going on. They're not abusing it. Quite often in these places we have issues with fly tipping and littering. Even that seems to be fairly low. People are generally interested in what we're doing, and even the councillors are seem to be regularly visiting and taking an interest in what's happening. Go back to gaining the community's trust before we designed this piece of land. I think it was through citizen science and the children. It was a fairly easy process. What was harder was taking the opinions of what children and their parents wanted and presented that to councils without a lot of opposition. Again, there was always someone huffing and puffing in the room about unrealisticness and where money should and shouldn't be spent. But in my opinion, this project will save a hell of a lot of money in the long run, whilst also gaining funding for the community. So yeah, I would say it's definitely something that's hard to do. It took us 4 years to even get the spade in the ground, not because we couldn't get the community on board, but because of various politics and yeah, dinosaurs in the room.
David, you'd asked a great question as well. So Tristan, is this the first project of its kind, or are there models of this elsewhere? And do you think that what we're doing here is setting up a blueprint for what can be done elsewhere? And do you think that talks like this today are a big part of paving that way for people?
I think talks like this should pave the way for people, yes. I think people need to be incredibly honest about what's happening. As much as people, some people may sit at the computer today and, not be happy about some of the things I'm saying, but someone's got to say it. And if they don't say it, things aren't going to improve. As far as I'm aware, forest gardens and agroecological projects do exist commercially. And there are community forest gardens around. But as far as I'm aware, this is the first agroecology project that is specifically led by the community. So it's quite unique in that respect. And also the way Connor has designed the land, he spent a couple of years actually studying that land, visiting it through all sorts of different weather conditions, patterns of seasons, to get the gist of how the land works. So it's been designed specifically to suit the environment in the local area. Even from the genetics in the fruit, we had to select varieties of fruit that are going to stand up to the environment in Cornwall. That's something that's really not happening at the moment. We're about to plonk a lot of tropical trees into turf, which is, fair enough. They look pretty for a short time of the year, but they don't flower for very long. And I think they're going to get a hell of a battering from the local environment. And I don't think in 10 years' time, a lot of the trees that we're planting, and I'm only talking about urban green space here, are going to still be standing. We've removed several ornamental cherry trees that have been damaged and blown over by the wind just on Trelog and Doorstep Green. In the last 3 years, we removed 5 trees. So it really goes to show that making sure species are well related to the environment in which they're standing, so that they're hardy and last for future time to come. And so yes, it's a very unique and special project, and I think it's going to go far, and I hope that it will be a model system that not only could be rolled out in other difficult to manage places, but potential to be upscaled into real agricultural environments. You know, my interest is alternative agriculture. I study the effects of chemicals on earthworms, and I'm absolutely mortified at what's happening to our soil. And so I wanted to find a way in which we could model these alternative agriscapes on a larger scale, but we would never ever gain access to a piece of land big enough to model that kind of system. So it also gives us an opportunity to showcase on a small scale how we could upscale it into you know, a more commercial styled agricultural system, possibly.
Tristan, just to add to that as well, there was a long time ago, let's have a look, 1996. I've just put it in the link. There was a community garden in Bradford called Springfield Community Garden that was designed using agroecology and permaculture principles, and it got the go-ahead and it started. And I do believe it is now a housing development. You might have to check that one out, but just in the chat box there, I've put a link to the full design specification that was put in place. So you guys can have a good look at that.
It's a real shame that something like that has happened, actually. The beauty of this project is obviously that we've actually gained access to a piece of land that was donated under a 106 obligation. So it should actually be protected for as long as it's there. And I assume there's other ways in which we may be able to protect land using various schemes, like you know, putting protection order on trees, for example, or creating village green status, things like that. So there are ways, I think, of ensuring a longer future for these projects.
Absolutely. Robin's just put another great question. Is it worth that for you to make a link with Incredible Edible Penryn? If the people watching this don't know about Incredible Edible, it's a fantastic countrywide movement that has been started, and it's nice to see there's one in Penryn.
I think that's an amazing idea. It's something that should definitely happen. We don't even have our website up and running yet, so it'd be great to be linked into some other like-minded organisations. In our opinion, as much as this particular project is local community, it absolutely needs as many people behind it as possible, you know, to take us seriously, and for more councils to take us seriously, for this kind of project to be used a little bit more widespread. You know, without people power, things just will not move forward. We need to make a stance here for a positive change.
Excellent. Has anyone else got any other questions?
Yeah, I was just trying to write a question, but I can't think how to phrase it. I just want to ask about rewilding. I mean, this is obviously a very different approach to rewilding, and rewilding has a lot of traction in policy these days. Would this land have been appropriate, or, you know, could it just be left alone, or was the problem that it wasn't being left alone and it needed some kind of planned approach?
Yeah. So under a 106 obligation, something has to happen to the land, but generally what has been happening is the land in our area seems to stand empty and not used, never used, until it almost becomes, sometimes these land under 106 obligations stand empty for such a long time that people, I believe, even forget that they're there and can be used. So what was the other part of your question?
No, just wondering, like, whether a land such as this can become wild, or it has to be maintained in some way.
Yeah, so 106 land can be basically adapted in any way that is community positive. So anything from playgrounds to community gardens, so long as it benefits the community, and it's meant to also be positive for the environment again. In fact, 106 obligations are actually one of the mitigations for what was environmental impact assessment. So I think sometimes it can be a little bit of a scapegoat to, you know, putting bird boxes on houses or bee bricks in, but it could also be a great alternative to developers. I mean, they should be increasing opportunities for wildlife on their developments as well, but it also gives the community an opportunity to, you know, to do a better job, to run projects themselves, and you know, learn for themselves.
Yeah, not to forget as well, Tristan, there is a wild aspect to it with the environmental corridors. They take up
that's right.
over a fifth of the land that is in this green space, and that land is going to be completely unmanaged. Chris, for myself to get, as the designer as well, to just touch on this, is that if we rewild our town and country areas, we still have all these hungry mouths in the town. And then we have to disconnect people with their food systems and grow it out in the countryside to ship the food to them. So from my perspective in designing this, I think that human beings have an obligation and a right to connect with where their food comes from and actually plug back into their ecosystem. I really believe what we're creating here is a human ecosystem, one that supports people, but it also supports wildlife. You know, you just have to stand under an apple tree in April to realize that there is some serious benefits for wildlife going on as well. So, you know, we all need to start growing our vegetables in our gardens, start doing suburban and peri-urban agriculture. And then it's my humble belief that the wilderness can ensue in what would have once been the agricultural landscape of the Great British countryside.
Yeah, well, sounds good to me.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done it. Let's upscale.
Robin has said, Tristan and Connor, are you happy to be contacted by other folk across Cornwall who might want to visit or get to come and talk to them?
Absolutely. This is a community project, you know, come and get involved, come and see what we're doing. Learn from it. We are still learning from it. You know, don't think that we have seen or know how to do it all. We have to work with the nature of the site. You know, some things won't work, and we'll have to figure out how nature wants it to work and how to work with it. And so we're every time we visit sites, something new is happening. You know. So just visit as much as you want, take the time, you know, contact us, come and have a tour, have the guided tour, you know, speak about the local ecology and how it's connected to the community and the rest of the landscape. And yeah, it's, although it is a small scale community project, we want to share our knowledge. We want to share our expertise, and we want to continue learning about these systems as well. The scope for research is huge, and it's a shame there's not more interest in it. Actually, I think.
What's the best way to get in touch with you, Tristan, regarding visits? Can you add any contact details to the YouTube?
Yeah, on the end of the presentation, there is a contact email address for myself. If people could contact me, either myself or Connor in that way, and then I could provide other means of contact.
I think what we're going to do, guys, we're going to do that classic YouTuber thing. In the links below, we will have both Tristan's email address and, for those interested in getting some design work done, my design email address as well. So you can get in touch with us. You can have a chat and a cup of tea with Tristan, or you can spend money on my design. That was dreadful. Okay, well, with that fantastic finisher there by Tristan, I think it's a really good time to wrap up. Tristan, I just want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart for coming.
Thanks for having me. It's an interesting experience. I'm glad it's gone well. I thought I might get more stick.
Oh no, it's all good. Well, there's no counsellors on here, so not at the moment anyway. Okay, well, thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you in the next one. So
Thank you all.
first
Take care.
coffee with CSC done. All right, take care, everyone. Have a great day.